Club will be 100 years old in 2027, and over the years, as you might imagine, we have lost lots and lots of members. So this event is for those two purposes. In addition to the city participating in this, Yvonne Minus, who is the councilwoman for that district, we are also giving away 100 wax myrtle bare root seedlings. So that will be following the event. We'll do our presentation at 11, dedication, and then we'll give away the wax myrtles. Thank you.
Well, it's right on the causeway.
Yeah, it's right on the causeway.
Melbourne Causeway.
Yeah.
On the left-hand side as you go in.
January 19th. It's January 19th is Florida's Arbor Day. It's not the same as the National Arbor Day because the best day or the best month for planting a tree in Florida is January, not April. So it's Florida's Arbor Day. Time is 11 a.m.
I don't think I'll need the mic. Our guest speaker, Zach, is Zachary Marchetti, and he is the Community Engagement and Outreach Officer for Brevard Zoo. His experience includes 2 years leading a field research team in the Ecuadorian Amazon and over 15 years in the zoo field as an educator, zookeeper, and a spokesperson. Tonight he's going to introduce us to a second campus for the Brevard Zoo at Port Canaveral. Hopefully you've all read about it in the paper or heard about it some way. It's a world-class 14-acre aquarium and conservation center on the banks of the Banana River, and with efforts to protect Florida's iconic waterways, and how the aquarium project will help restore and protect wildlife and wild places. Zach, welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. Let me just start my slideshow real quick. All right. I don't think I need the microphone either. Everybody can hear me okay? All right, good. Because that means I can move around a little bit, which makes me happy too. Like Sarah said, my name is Zach. I'm the Community Engagement and Outreach Officer for Brevard Zoo. So I work within the philanthropy department, but most of my job is spent either out in the community talking to groups about things that we do, or doing tours of the zoo. But that's not how I started at Brevard Zoo. I actually started because I was brought in to start our first venomous snake program. So we'll spend the first half hour or so talking about venomous snakes, because I know everybody likes venomous snakes as much as I do, right? I know that not everybody does, and that's fine, right? And in fact, venomous snakes are not the only thing that I'm interested in. What I've found throughout my career is that I'm just a nature nerd. I can get excited about anything when it comes to nature. And one of the things that I've gotten really excited about since being here, and one of the reasons I moved here, was this aquarium project. But before we start talking about any of that, we talked about the zoo. And that's because anytime I'm doing a presentation, doesn't matter if it's for a group that's never heard of us before, or a board of directors or staff, I always start out with the same couple of slides, because where we've come from is such a huge part of who we are. The story of Brevard Zoo is so incredibly unique. How many people were here when Brevard Zoo first opened? Awesome. Made a brick. How many other people made a brick? How many bricks do we have out there? Not bad. How many people were involved with some part of the construction or something? Got a couple hands too. I met somebody not too long ago who raised their hand and they said, well, I don't know if you can really count it. I didn't do that much. I said, well, what'd you do? She said, well, I just brought water to the people that were working. So, they were doing construction outside in Florida. Your job was important, right? But what's incredible is that number right there. that original build, this group of people that came together said, hey, we have an idea. We want to save some sort of space here for nature, for conservation. We see the growing population coming in. We need a space to focus on that, on these natural places, connecting with wildlife. And they brought more than 16,000 people together to build bricks, to carry water, to hammer, to saw, to build Brevard Zoo. We call ourselves the largest community-built zoo in the world. Now, I have not heard of any other community-built zoos, so we might also be the smallest community-built zoo. But largest is certainly more impressive, so that's what we go with, right? But no matter what you want to call it, smallest, biggest, middlest, the fact that we were built and founded by the community, for the community, is such an important part of where we've come from. And it's something that you can still see in the zoo today. And the easiest way to see it is when you walk into the zoo and you look for those hibiscus shirts. We have more than 500 active volunteers, ranging from age like 16 all the way up into their early 90s. Our oldest volunteer at 92 just retired from volunteering this past week, so I don't know what our current oldest is. Do we have any zoo volunteers in the audience? I have to ask, and people go, well, don't you know your own volunteers? We have over 500 of them. So yeah, I know some of them, right? But what is amazing is that when you come through the zoo and you see these volunteers and you see how passionate they are, it is such a huge and really kind of obvious demonstration of the fact that there is still so much community ownership and community involvement with Brevard Zoo. And that is something that's really, really unique. And it continues that tradition as really being a community-driven organization. Now, during COVID, we changed our mission statement. And during COVID, many organizations kind of looked inward and refocused on who we are. Our old mission statement was wildlife conservation through education and participation. And that was really, really cool. We had that for like 27 years almost. But we changed it. And we changed it to this. We share our joy of nature to help wildlife and people thrive. And we added that people really intentionally for two reasons. One, we realized that the zoo was really important to people. When we opened the doors after COVID, we had a flood of people coming in. We had to time tickets because otherwise everybody was just going to jam themselves through the gates at the same time. And they were all coming in with these huge smiles on their faces because it was a place that they felt safe, that they could connect with nature. And I think this group probably knows how important that is, right? I mean, there are measurable actual effects in the brain, on your psychiatry and psychology when we connect with nature. And so we realized how important the space was to our community, but also how important our community was to the zoo. But at the same time, when you start to look at conservation, whether it's locally or internationally, what we're seeing is that you cannot do good conservation work without people. We are so far past the days where we could just put a chunk of nature over here and say, all right, everybody walk this path, it'll be fine, right? Now, our impacts go far beyond our footsteps. I have stood in the middle of the Amazon rainforest in these incredibly diverse, pristine spaces, and you go up on a hill at night, and you can see the glow in the distance where they're burning natural gas from the oil wells because it's cheaper to just burn it as it comes out of the ground than actually send it back. We have to work with people that live and work and play in the areas that we're trying to protect. Again, that doesn't matter if it's the Amazon rainforest, if it's Australia, New Zealand, or right here. And so we knew we needed to incorporate people into the things that we do. So that's our mission statement. But we also have this sort of unofficial mission, and that is that we answer the call. When the zoo was founded, it was not founded to solve a particular conservation issue. It wasn't built to be a turtle rehab facility or something like that. It was just built to be a conservation and education facility. But as the zoo grew, people started asking for help. And we just developed this model of saying, yes, okay, sure, we'll help. We don't know what that help will be, but we'll help however we can. And so this model of we answer the call has really kind of led us down a lot of different roads that we may not have reached if we set out with particular goals. Now, some of them are the things that people kind of expect zoos to do, like taking care of orphaned wildlife, right? And so over the years, we've had a lot of different orphan wildlife that's come to us. Some of them native animals, like Brody and Betty here. Betty is not actually stuck, she's just posing for the camera. Orphan bear cubs that came to us, and when they came to us, we kind of realized that there weren't really any facilities in Florida able to care for and rehab these youngest neonatal bear cubs. And so we started working with black bears, and that's become a larger part of our program over the last few years in particular. We've had orphan spider monkeys come to us. Mateo and then little Jay here both were confiscating, being smuggled from Mexico into the United States, designated for the pet trade. They came to us, we were able to integrate them into our troop, and they're doing really, really well now. And so those are the things that people are like, okay, yeah, that's kind of what zoos do, right? But we've also ended up working out in the field and in different capacities with a lot of native wildlife as well. Everything from diamondback terrapins and Florida scrub jays to beach mice and grasshopper sparrows. How many people have heard of Florida grasshopper sparrows before? All right, that's pretty impressive. I did a group of about 400 people, and I had less hands than that. So you guys are good, you know your birds. And that's really cool because that right there is one of the most critically endangered birds in all of North America. Tiny little pocket of habitat left in the prairies of Central Florida. Estimates about a year and a half ago when they did a big kind of survey to find as many as they could, identified that probably between 100 and 200 of them left in their natural range. A couple of years ago, actually also during COVID, U.S. Fish and Wildlife came to us and they said, hey, we've got 6 of these birds. They're at another facility. The facility cannot take care of them anymore. Can we bring them to you? We said, yes. When are you bringing them? I said, tomorrow. I said, okay. Myself and some of the other animal managers and animal staff physically built habitats for them because we didn't have good spaces that would keep these tiny little brown birds safe from red rat snakes and fire ants and all the other things that could become problematic. So we built spaces for them. The birds came in, we put them in their spaces. We said, all right, it's not perfect, but they're fine. They'll be safe and healthy and happy here until we know what Fish and Wildlife wants to do with them. Well, what we realized Fish and Wildlife wanted to do with them was leave them with us. I said, okay, well, if we've got these birds, we need to do something with them. We don't just have animals to have animals. They're tiny little brown birds, not going to do great out on exhibit somewhere for guests to see. They're critically endangered, so we should be breeding them. We should be part of this breeding program. But the spaces that we had weren't adequate. And so we turned to the community. And in the middle of COVID, when everybody's financial future was completely uncertain, this community put together more than $100,000 to build a breeding facility for this tiny little brown bird that most people have never heard of and no zoo guests will ever get to see. Now I say that because it enforces this point that every success that the zoo has is a community vote. And so I grew up watching these fly fishing videos where people come into the Mosquito Lagoon and in here, I want to be near this waterway. Because even though it's in trouble, it is still incredible. There are more threatened and endangered species of animal and plant in Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge than any other national wildlife refuge in the continental United States. This is a really special place. And it is home to a lot of really neat animals. Those are the ones that mostly catch people's eye, but I think this group knows a lot of really neat plants as well, right? And there are a lot of problems. One of the questions that we get, especially when I'm talking to HOAs and communities where you have a lot of people that have been moving down since COVID, may not know as much as what are the problems? Well, kind of what aren't the problems, right? But when it comes down to it, most of them stem to us. Rapid growth, not enough infrastructure, so habitat destruction, leaching from sewers and septic systems, and all of these different things that come in. A lot of people like to say the lagoon is dying from a death of 1,000 cuts, right? It's all of these different things. But there are a lot of people doing good work. We first started really working with the lagoon back in 2009 in a project with UCF up in the Mosquito Lagoon building these oyster mats. And there's a bunch of school kids with the oyster mats that they built using this aquaculture mesh and put oyster shells on it, seeded with baby oysters, started to rebuild some oyster reefs, and they started to grow some oysters. And so Brevard County started to have the zoo do it a little bit closer to home. we started changing our methods. We said, all right, we don't want to put all this plastic in the water. Yeah, it's this aquaculture plastic. It's supposed to last a really long time, but let's see what we can do better. And so over years, this program has evolved. In fact, just this past year, we finished building our first reef with no man-made materials at all. It's a corral of coquina rock that surrounds piles of oyster shells that are seeded with baby oysters. So we're in the monitoring period for that to see how effective that methodology is going to be. But again, this project has only grown because of the community. Every single one of those green dots is a home where the homeowners had the right water quality, the right water depth, the right flow, the right salinity, and also said yes. Do we have any oyster gardeners in the audience? Thank you. More than 1,600 people said yes to this program. They came to the zoo, they dedicated their time to learn how to take care of oysters, how to keep them free of algae, how to dry them up into the air sometimes so they can get some sunlight and some oxygen. You got to find oyster sitters for when you go on vacation. Make sure that the oysters are being cared for. And then once those oysters grow enough, they can come back and become part of these reefs. And because of that program and because of the community support, we built almost 2 miles of oyster reef back within the lagoon. And some of these reefs are thriving. Yeah, some of the early ones didn't do so well. But that's learning, right? That's science. That's life. We learn as we go. The newer ones, we really started to nail the water parameters and things. We're talking hundreds of thousands of oysters recruited in a single year to a couple of our newer reefs that were built in 2022. So really, really encouraging because oysters are great, right? They help filter the water. They're important filter feeders, but so are clams. So then we got involved with St. John River Water Management District, started working with clams as well, because clams like different water quality than oysters. And you'll hear some people, usually people that are very dedicated to either one or the other for their livelihood, say, oh, clams are better, or no, oysters are better. They're both better. They're both best. We need them both. Because oysters like fresh water and flow. Clams like salt water, a little less flow. They like seagrass. They like different conditions, so they're going to inhabit different spots. And in drought years, when the salinity of the lagoon comes up, clams are going to thrive. Oysters are just going to kind of shut down and hold on. When we get a ton of rain for a couple of years and the salinity drops, clams are going to clam up, oysters are going to thrive, right? And so we get this balance, like we see with so many things in nature. And so we've been working with clams. I got to go out with our Restore Shores team for a clam project. I was shocked at really 2 things. One, how many hundreds of thousands of clams you can fit in a bag this big when they're only the size of your fingernail. But 2, how quickly those clams grow. Because we were planting a bed right next to one they had planted just 6 months prior. Clams we were planting, again, maybe not my pinky nail, but probably about the size of my pointer nail. Said, yep, see, we planted the same size over here 6 months ago. We're going to check them while we're out here. Those clams are like that big. The lagoon can recover. The wildlife and the ecosystem services that we need to help it can thrive. We just have to give it a chance. And so now we're working with seagrass as well, because we've seen that huge decline in seagrass that has led to manatee deaths and the loss of habitat for so many fish and other animals. We've built 2 seagrass nurseries now. Our first one at the Hub SeaWorld property is up and running. It has seagrass growing in it. And this is an opportunity not to grow enough seagrass to replant the lagoon. We know that that's not what we're going to do. But we can study seagrass and we can learn about it, because there's still a lot we don't know. We don't know how and why different types of seagrass in the lagoon flower and grow seed. I had a biologist friend who found a seed of the shoal grass this past year, and she was ecstatic. She's been working with seagrass for years. It's the first time she had ever seen a seed for that grass. There's a lot we can still learn about this stuff. And so having these nurseries, no, we're not going to plant ourselves back to a healthy lagoon. But we can learn about the plants and help create the conditions that we need to help them thrive. But we also know that the problems aren't all just in the water. When we started that oyster program, and we were making a call out to communities and asking for help and asking for oyster gardeners, we had a problem. And the problem was all of the people that didn't have water for oysters that were saying, well, what about us? We want to help too. That's a really cool problem to have. because we had to create a program. We had to start doing these Adopt a Mangrove events like other organizations have done, because our community wanted to help. And so they'd take those mangroves, they'd grow them for the years it takes to reach a plantable size, and then use them to help replant native shorelines. And we haven't done much adoptive mangrove recently, because we ended up with kind of a surplus of mangroves for quite a while. But we have started doing a lot more of these buffer zone plantings, where we're planting buffer zones in parks. We have one at the Paddles and Boards Park, and another one that was just completed as well. And other organizations are doing this too, where we're creating those buffer zones of native plants, so that the landscaping company that is contracted by the county or the city or whoever's coming through isn't coming through and mowing right to the water's edge and then leaf blowing all of the grass clipping straight into the water and going, hey, look, free manatee food, right? Because we know that's not the case. That just adds fertilizers and pesticides and more nitrogen, more phosphorus, and just fuels that whole cycle of algae blooms again. So being able to start doing more of these buffer zone plantings is something we've been really excited about. But as we've grown all of these programs, and as we've seen so many other organizations grow these programs as well, we've realized it's not enough, right? We're all putting Band-Aids on these little thousands of cuts, but there is still this huge arterial bleed of the water that's coming in from septic tanks and sewers. And the only way we can really, really fix that is if everyone in the community is saying the same thing in the same voice at the same time. So, well, how do we as a zoo do that? How do we do more than we're doing already? Our Restore Our Shores program has grown so large, we had to get them a whole warehouse and set of office space in Rockledge. They don't fit at the zoo anymore. And so we said, well, what do we do best? Well, we connect people with wildlife, we get them excited about it, and make them want to care and want to help. And so that's when we came up with the idea for our legacy campaign and this new aquarium. So our legacy campaign is this $100 million campaign that we're in the middle of. That is to build this new aquarium and conservation campus, but to continue to support the zoo as well. And that's really important. The zoo is not going away. The zoo is our heart, it's who we are, and so we are still supporting the zoo. We have a lot of new things going on at the zoo. We just bought a brand new CT machine to help us with our sea turtle care, because sea turtles are basically black boxes. You can't x-ray through that shell. If you try an ultrasound, you've got like 4 little soft spots that you can see a little bit of depth in. You need a CT machine to really check out what's going on internally with turtles. So we have a new CT scanner. We are working on building spaces to be able to rehab manatees and young black bears at the zoo. This is Jelly Bean. Anybody seen posts about Jelly Bean that the zoo had? Jelly Bean was a tiny, tiny little bear. She was so much smaller than she should have been. She was like 12 pounds and she should have been like 35 or 40 for her age when she was found. But we brought her in, we were able to successfully rehab her, be able to feed her, get her eating on her own, or not Jelly Bean, her name was Fruit Cup, sorry, Jelly Bean is a different turtle, is a turtle, not a bear. Fruit Cup, this black bear, her name was Fruit Cup because that was the first thing they were able to get her to eat. But then she started eating normal bear food, which is really kind of anything and everything, right? We got her stronger, they were able to maintain that sort of natural fear of humans around her, get her over to Fish and Wildlife at Homosassa, and our Wild Florida curator and our director of animal programs were actually able to go with FWC on the release for Fruit Cup and like 4 or 5 other similar-aged bear cubs that were all being rehabbed at the same time. And it worked, it was successful, it was really exciting. But Betty, the third black bear we have at the zoo, she's at the zoo because she was not successfully rehabbed. We tried to rehab her. We thought we had done a good job. We sent her over to FWC at Homosassa. They called us a couple days later. They said, you need to come get Betty because she is teaching all of the other bears really bad things. Because Betty had lost her natural fear of humans. And she was too curious about people. And she had too much of a connection. It wasn't because our staff did anything wrong. Just because we're not really set up for bear rehab. And so this campaign is allowing us to raise money so that we can expand those facilities and be able to do that successfully. It will allow us to actually have manatee rehab at the zoo as well. This won't be critical care rehab, but it will be supportive care, so that when our partner organizations like SeaWorld and Zoo Tampa are able to stabilize those most critically injured or ill manatees, then they can bring them to us. We can care for them, we can continue their care free up those critical care spaces, and then return them back to their home. And also it allows us to, and I apologize ahead of time for the pun, get our feet wet with manatee care, because coming up we will have critical care manatee spaces, and that'll be at the new aquarium. But long before that's open, we will have our new lion habitat. Anybody, who has seen our 3 lion doors? Good, a lot of hands. If you haven't seen them, come check them out. They are beautiful. They're all about 500 pounds, absolutely gorgeous. And we are in the middle of construction and renovation of our Africa area to give them their big 16,000 square foot new home, which is going to be a fantastic improvement for them, also for our guests, and free up more space in our Florida area where they're living now, maybe to help more bears, if that's where the need is, or panthers, or wherever that next call for Florida wildlife comes from. But the big shiny object, the one that everybody's talking about, is the aquarium project. And so the aquarium project is this idea, is this plan to build a 14-acre aquarium and conservation center out at Cape Canaveral. It will be just like Brevard Zoo in that we are economically independent. About a third of the time when I'm out in the community, I get introduced as Zach from Brevard County Zoo. We are not Brevard County Zoo. We are an independent nonprofit, one of about only 25 accredited zoos or aquariums within all 230 that are within the AZA that exist completely free economically and independent of local government. Means that we have to be a little bit more entrepreneurial, but it also means that we can answer the call. We don't need to go through all of the county or city bureaucracy when we want to help scrub jays, or when the birds are coming in tomorrow and we need to spend a couple $100 to fix up a habitat for them, right? So still being economically independent and still trying to be as interactive as we can, trying to connect our guests with the environment and wildlife. And so I'm going to show you a little fly-through video of what it would be like to take a quick trip through the aquarium. So we'll go through a couple of the renderings that were within the video, kind of dive into a little bit more detail and show you guys a little bit more about it. So for anybody who's not clear from the video on where this is going, this is the 14 acres that we have secured with the port. So here's 528 A1A coming out towards Cocoa Beach, and then here's exit 54B to George King Boulevard. So normally you would hop off the exit, take a left, go out to Fish Lips, the other restaurant's out there. Right now, if you take a right, you go about 30 feet, you hit a chain link fence, so don't take a right. But in a couple of years, if you take a right, you'll pull right into the aquarium, because this is the space where it will be going. So we're right on the Banana River, right across from the cruise port, easy to get to for a lot of folks. And so really about as good of a spot as we possibly could have hoped. We're literally on the banks of the water we're trying to connect people with and trying to fix. And that is way too small to be able to see that. So yeah, we'll skip ahead here. So this is that kind of big pretty picture that we've been sharing a lot. And this is the original artist rendering of what the aquarium will look like. And most of the time when I show this picture, and people see it for the first time, you get two questions. First one, when did it open? Nope, it's not real, it's just a good rendering. And then the second is, where's the aquarium? Because most of the time when we imagine an aquarium, what do we imagine? One big building, right? Stand in the dark, look through a wall of glass at fish all day long. It's a regular aquarium, not a Brevard Zoo aquarium. If we've got you kayaking past rhinos and ziplining over crocodiles, you are not going to stand in the dark and stare at fish all day long at our aquarium, right? This is going to be an immersive, experience-oriented facility where we are working to make those connections between our guests, our wildlife, and our wild places. So this whole facility is this sprawling campus conservation center. We're using a lot of different words to talk about it, but it is still just an artist rendering. There are things that have changed. For example, this building, this is the conservation hub. This is now 3 stories instead of 2. There's now manatee rehab right here. That big water play area in the middle is shrinking because it was way too big. And the capacity of that space was going to outweigh the capacity of the entire other space, and we were just going to turn into a water park that also had a few fish. So plans have changed since that original rendering was done, right? But the look and feel of it, this is really kind of the most current design, is still the same. Again, water area is going to be shrinking even kind of from what it is here. Here you put your manatees over here, and all of these buildings are being added. So designs are coming along. But what I've picked out is a couple of renderings that show what I think are some of kind of the most impactful, potentially impactful experiences that we're going to have. And one of the first experiences when guests come into the new facility is going to be a new sea turtle rehab facility, a new healing center for turtles. Now this will not replace our current sea turtle healing center, it will add to it. So we'll still have the whole facility that we have behind the scenes of the zoo, but this will give us about 50% more space to help turtles, which is great because our sea turtle hospital has 2 big problems. First is that we do run out of space. Almost every year, at least once, we have to turn turtles away. But the other problem is that nobody gets to see it. And we know that when we give these opportunities to connect with the stories of wildlife, people create these connections based on empathy. And that's what fuels behavior change. Zoos and aquariums and museums have been studying behavior change for years, trying to figure out how do we get people to do these conservation actions that we're trying to get them to do. Teaching doesn't necessarily work. You can tell them everything as they come through. You can put up all the signs you want, and about 7% of guests are going to actually read them all. You need to create those empathy connections. And so this space will be guest-facing, so that every guest that comes through will be able to see these turtles on every step of their journey of care, right? From these smallest tanks where they're coming in at first because they need to be confined to those small spaces, either because they can't surface properly or they can't navigate a larger, more complex space, right? They'll be able to see into the treatment rooms so that they can watch our veterinarians performing these surgeries and procedures, not only on turtles, but all the other animals that live at the aquarium conservation campus. And then we'll have this big, fabricated, beautiful space that will be home to potentially unreleasable ambassador turtles, but also for those turtles that have kind of graduated in their care. They don't need to be confined to these smaller intake habitats. They can be out here gaining strength, getting ready for their journey home. And so we can follow that journey and make those connections with these turtles as individuals. And when we make that connection, we understand them as living, feeling beings with needs that are similar to our own, right? And that's really what we're trying to do. Once we go through, there will be some of these sort of normal aquarium experiences. This is our locks building, so it'll be indoors, it'll be dark, it'll be air conditioned, it'll be a break from the heat, and it'll be that kind of traditional aquarium experience that a lot of folks will be looking for. And this is what it looks like if you were to go underneath the locks, because there's always schools of big game fish in there. And when you talk to anglers, a lot of them will say, oh yeah, well they're in there because we're not allowed to fish for them in there. No. If that was a concrete seawall, those fish wouldn't be there. They're there because we accidentally built really good habitat for them when we built those docks and those pilings, right? Because all of those beams and posts and pilings attract barnacles and oysters and all of the little things that then attract the shrimps and the minnow and start this food chain. And so this experience is a really cool opportunity, not only to give people that traditional aquarium experience that they're looking for, but also to remind us that when we build things for us, whether it's planting our yard with native plants and creating habitat for wildlife, or whether it's building a dock with extra structure, or there's conversations going on right now with all these offshore windmills that are talking about, and all this like, okay, we need to make it the smallest little post that we can so animals don't bump into it. Well, what are animals more likely going to bump into? Something that's really, really small and fine, or something that's big and obvious? What if we do them on tripods, like the old oil rigs in Texas, which are now these flourishing reefs and have increased habitat for a lot of fish that in other areas are starting to disappear along that coastline? It gives us a chance to kind of rethink how we live and coexist with nature. Also have a big water play area for the kids so that we can do all the fun stuff, and coffee for the parents so that they don't fall asleep while the kids are playing in the water all day long. Excuse me. But after we give you sort of that traditional experience, we go back outside and we start doing fun Brevard Zoo style stuff, because this is an overhead view of the current plans for what will be our sharks at flats area and our stingrays area. And this is one of my favorite experiences, because even though we're not going to put you in the water with bull sharks, we want to make it feel like you are in the water with bull sharks. Now, this is where I remind everyone that this is an artist's rendering, okay? We would never put that many big sharks in a space that size. Oh yeah, and the kid won't be able to pet the shark either. But what this artist got right is that these walls are going to be low. This is going to be a low-walled, shallow, curving plexi path, thick acrylic. There will be safety panels so that nobody touches the sharks and vice versa. But we want to create this feeling that once you get out through this path is curved, and you have that borrowed landscape of the Banana River behind you, that it feels like you're standing in the middle of the flats surrounded by sharks. Average depth of the Indian River Lagoon, 156 miles long, 4 feet. This is the type of area where we experience sharks within the lagoon, not from 40 feet under in a big glass bubble like you get to do at some of the bigger aquariums. Now they'll have deeper refuges as well, because sharks like to have that deep water to get to, and again, we would never put that many big ones in a space that size. But this gives us an opportunity to remind ourselves the importance of predators, because predators are important. We know that. When they reintroduced wolves to Yellowstone National Park, the streams got healthier, because all of a sudden the elk and the deer that had become overpopulated in the absence of predators started to get thinned down again, which meant that they weren't trampling the banks as much. They weren't overgrazing the plants that grew along the banks, and it halted the erosion, and the fish populations got healthier. If wolves can impact the health of fish, think about how important sharks probably are, right? And so we need healthy populations of predators, but we also need to learn how to live alongside them safely. So having these sharks here is a really important part of that experience. But the Indian River Lagoon is not the only body of water that defines us here. The St. Johns River and the Atlantic Ocean are also two really important parts of our ecosystem and our climate, and part of why this area is so unique. So we will have an area that focuses on the St. Johns River, so we'll have some American alligators. There's a little tease of the manatees, which I'll get to in a second. And then we'll also have North American river otters. We lost our North American river otters at the zoo about a year and a half, or maybe even 2.5 years ago now. It was devastating. They were guest favorites, volunteer favorites, staff favorites, and it was overnight, quite literally. And it was such a strange case. We still don't know exactly what happened, University of Florida Vet School is actually writing a paper on the case because of how odd it was. And so we know how much this community loves otters, and we want to have otters again, but we want to build them a brand new space. And so we likely will have them again at the zoo someday when we're able to renovate the space that they have in Florida. But part of the current plans is going to be this North American river otter habitat with a couple of really neat opportunities to see them a little differently. You'll have an opportunity to see them from kind of the deep water as they swim and as they play, just like we did at the zoo, right? So here's that zoom in. This is a cross section from in where the water play area would be. We actually have in the plans a wet wading area, so that after you've done the outside circle, if you want to, you can kick your Crocs off or your flip-flops off or stow your shoes in a cubby and do a wet wade along the inside and get a whole nother way of viewing the animals. But we will also have another kind of unique experience. This one, I don't think that I would fit in. I don't think many of us would. But for the kids, the grandkids, the nieces, the nephews, this will be a tube that actually cuts through the water habitat. Water on all sides once you get down under, and kind of beveled so that there's a space for the otters to kind of lay and relax. And we're going to do what we can to enhance that space to try and encourage the otters to be up there as much as they can. Otters are playful, so it's pretty easy to do by putting toys and treats and things like that. We're never going to make them be up there. Trust me, if you've ever tried to make an otter do anything, it probably didn't go very well. But we want to encourage them to be there, to give guests these experiences. Again, just making these connections with these animals and how playful they are, how social they are. And then trying to do something even a little bit more distinct and a little bit more interactive. Ever wanted to hold hands with an otter? I bet you do now, right? Yeah. This is an experience, we've seen it at a couple other facilities where you can actually go in and you can hold hands with otters. It was the first kind of way it popped up at another facility was they were training the otters for voluntary blood draws. And this is something that we do with a lot of our animals at the zoo. We do it with our black bears. If you come and see the black bears right now, both Betty and Brody have big shaved spots on their arms because they're being trained for voluntary blood draws, where they will put their hand into a kind of a compartment that comes out through the habitat because we never go into the same space as them. And they just voluntarily hold their hand there and wait patiently for whatever it is that there's their treats that day. And the vets are able to draw blood. They can pull their hand away whenever they want. And the same is true for these types of experiences with otters. It's all based on voluntary participation. So we make it a fun game for the otters, and it gives you a really, really, really neat special experience to be able to offer and another way to connect with these animals. But right next door to those kind of St. John's River inhabitants will be what will be our true critical care manatee space. And so this is the space we will have those small intake critical care pools that have these braided floors. So you can actually lift a manatee up to the surface so that you can give it fluids or take blood or medicate, whatever you might need to do. Or maybe just control the depth because that manatee can't come 8 feet from the bottom to the surface. But the ones who can will be able to navigate these underwater tunnels to go from these smaller critical care spaces out to this larger public-facing fabricated habitat. Because just like with the turtles, we want people to see the work that's being done, but more importantly, want them to connect with the animals. It is a much different connection that one makes when they see a manatee like this than a potato underwater when they're going 30 on a jet ski, right? It's a whole different opportunity. And again, that opportunity to make these empathy connections, because based on their scars, because most of the manatees that come in have scars, you can identify them as individuals. And so you can put their stories up, and you can give guests the opportunity to follow their stories and learn more about them and start to make those connections. But one of the spaces that I think is most special about this entire campus is this coastal conservation hub right here. In the beginning of the plans, it was 2 floors, now it's 3. We've dedicated it to Dr. Dwayne DeFries, who has really been a lagoon champion for more than 40 years. And is just such a huge inspiration for so many groups that are working on the lagoon. And this is the space where we will have classrooms, so we can continue all the same types of education things that we do at the zoo, but just do more of them, focused on the lagoon. We'll have labs, so that visiting researchers can come and have a space to process samples or hop on the computer. Maybe it's the megafauna group that's working with manta rays off the coast, and they need to come in, log some samples, and they can do that as they come through the port. And maybe while they're in that classroom, there's a group of sophomores that are there on a field trip, right? And they're also using the lab equipment. And all of a sudden, they're working right next to a real-life biologist. For me at 16, that would have been so cool. Eventually, I realized I didn't like research biology anyway, but still, right? It got me down that path. So all of these things, not only to provide resources for our scientific community and our education community, but to help steward those next groups of environmentalists, of water warriors, of marine biologists, the people that we need to continue this long after we are all gone. And then last but certainly not least, just like the zoo, we'll have event space, and this is going to be a really awesome spot with a second floor balcony and even a third floor balcony to charge big corporations a whole lot of money to host rocket launch viewing parties, so that then we can funnel that money back into conservation. And that's really awesome, right? Yeah, we like that. That's what we're doing. Well, why are we doing it, right? Well, I talked about it. It's what we do. We connect people with wildlife. Early estimates say that this should be easily reaching 500,000 in annual attendance. When we did those estimates, the zoo was doing like 400,000. We broke 500,000 in 2022 for the first time. These numbers are going up because that port is not shrinking, right? We are now next to the busiest passenger cruise port in the world. And every single one of those paid admissions that comes through the door will funnel a minimum of $1 to the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. And that's a promise that we've made from the start. We have that plan actually in formal writing with the IRL NEP now, so that it will go into a side fund, because we apply for grants from the NEP to help fund some of our oyster work, and we don't want to apply for our own money. That's not cool, right? So it will go into a side fund that we can't get to make sure that it's going to those other groups that are also doing good work. Have a huge impact on jobs and dollars in the region. We're talking about something like $85 million in economic impact annually, more than the zoo. But really, most importantly, it will be that celebration of our waterways, of our wildlife, of our way of life here. It's not this doom and gloom, everything is terrible. It is, look how special this place is. Look how fragile this place is. And helping make connections, not only for us who live here, but for all those folks coming through the cruise port. Using our local examples to tell these really universal stories. Because we know that water issues is not something we're facing alone here. Right? You can see the same algae bloom issues in the Great Lakes right now, near Detroit and some of the other big cities along the edge of the water. Water is our biggest issue as a planet right now. And telling these universal stories means that whether folks are visiting from Melbourne, Florida, or Melbourne, Australia, they can still take those stories home with them and adapt them to wherever it is that they're learning. So we are already seeing impact. We're working with the Cocoa Beach Junior Senior High School on an aquascience program, which will basically create a technical certificate in like aquaculture and life services, so filtration and pumps and all of these things that, hey, great, they can come work at the aquarium, but also all of these other budding industries that involve huge amounts of moving water, and creating a technical program for these kids. Working on that major grant program that we just talked about, and some ideas for what will be a free space within that building, that 3-story building. The bottom floor will be free. You don't have to pay to come into the aquarium to go in there. The aquarium's open, you can just walk through the doors. And within there, you will have opportunities to learn about the lagoon, learn about the impacts that conservation is having, the pollution effects, and just trying to make that science as accessible as we possibly can. So we have that site approved in 2021. If you took that right-hand turn off of exit 54B onto George King Boulevard, before you hit the chain link fence, you would hit this sign, which would do more damage than the chain link fence because it's on pretty big posts. And that's really exciting. I got to go out to the spot and actually walk out into the middle of it for the first time about 6 months ago and just stand there and picture it. And that was really, really cool. So if you're headed out to the port, I do recommend just keep an eye out for that sign as you see it there. We are over 70 million towards our $100 million goal, which is incredibly exciting. This is exponentially larger than anything we've ever done before. But we know that we still have a long way to go as well. So we are still working very, very hard planning to break ground in fall of this year. First time I've gotten to say that during a presentation. That's pretty exciting. With a planned opening in early 2027, obviously depending on hurricanes and global material shortages and all those fun things. Construction can be variable. We're looking at a little over 2 years for construction, and then actually getting everything up and running and opening the doors for folks. So we are incredibly excited about this project. We do believe this will be our legacy. That's why we're calling it our legacy campaign. Most of the time, if you're working on a project like this, you would come to an audience and you would say, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be involved with a project like this. But in this community, it's not. For a lot of folks, this is a twice-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and that's a pretty cool thing to be able to say. Because we do want this project to be accessible. We want people to be able to be involved in any way that is meaningful and possible for them. We want to cut a check for $10 million, I'll start breaking that hole for the piping tomorrow, I promise. But we want everyone to feel that they have the opportunity to be involved. So if you want to help spread the word, I have bookmarks. You want to take 30 bookmarks and hand them out to friends or drop them off at your favorite coffee shop. Share social media posts, volunteer, help us out at nature festivals and things when we're coming out and talking to people about this project. There are lots and lots of ways to get involved, and the easiest way is through the campaign website. You can just click the Get Involved button, it'll send an email to me, and I will get back to you as quickly as I possibly can. If I don't get back to you within like 2 days, email me again because it's already buried somewhere. But we're trying to get as many people excited about this possible so that when this is built, everybody feels the same way we do about the zoo. This is our space, right? And that's what we want. So that's what we're doing. That's why we're doing it. We're really excited about it. Thank you all so much for giving me the opportunity to come and speak to you about this. I'm not sure where we are on time for the evening, probably long because that's kind of my habit. But I will stick around for questions if anybody has them either afterwards or now, depending on kind of how much time we have. But you guys can tell me how we're doing on time. Yeah, okay, so questions? Okay, does anybody have any questions? Yes?
Yes, can you update us on any moves about designating the Indian River Lagoon as a national park and how that might impact the development of the aquarium?
Great question. So designated the lagoon as a national park. I don't know of any developments there. Our biggest tie to kind of anything going on at that level is Dwayne, Dr. DeFries, and he's a part of our campaign cabinet. We meet with him really regularly and have not seen anything updated. The land that we have is all port land. Nothing's going to be impacted within the lagoon itself. So it shouldn't necessarily impact the construction of it, but if it could impact our ability to put controls in place to protect it and provide some weight to some of the measures that go out to try and protect it, because there are measures in place. Some of them have very, very small fines, and so it's a lot easier to just, yeah, I'm really sick of these mangroves blocking my view. I'll just pay the fine next month when somebody notices, right? So those designations, we would be all for them, but I have not heard any sort of updates on anything like that. Great question.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Are you going to have like memberships like you have the Zoo membership?
Yeah.
And if you have a Zoo membership, does that go there?
Great question. So memberships, we have aquarium memberships and we'll zoo membership cover. Likely what we will have, and none of this is solidified yet, but I can pretty much guarantee there will be 3 options, right? You can have a zoo membership, you can have an aquarium membership, or you can have a combined membership. Because we know that there's going to be folks, maybe down towards Palm Bay or something, that don't want to make the drive up all the way up to the aquarium so often to justify a membership, or maybe vice versa. Folks coming down from, MIMS or coming from Orlando that aren't going to come all the way down to the zoo, or maybe they just don't like giraffe for some reason. They go, oh, I don't want to go there. I don't like giraffe. I don't know. But there will be options. That's kind of the pretty standard within other zoo and aquarium organizations that have kind of multiple campuses like this, so that if you have a family that's just wants to be able to come to the zoo and maybe that combo is a little bit out of reach or maybe it's unnecessary, be able to have that other option for them. So it looks like we'll most likely have those 3 options and probably still have tiered options within all of them like we do with our current membership system. Yeah. Good question.
Second question.
Yep.
I have a group of friends that are interested in volunteering with the oyster mats, but we don't know how to go about doing that.
Yeah. So the Restore Our Shores website is restoreourshores.org, but you can also get there through the zoo website, and there is a volunteer button. that typically will show you a bunch of kind of upcoming opportunities, the dates that they have for an upcoming oyster build, reef build, or whatever it might be that they are putting out a call for help. But then there's also a contact button. So if you have a group that maybe none of those dates are going to work for, maybe they don't have any dates posted because it's outside of reef building season, and they don't need any groups, you can reach out. Kimberly Rudolph is the coordinator, and she is fantastic. She will get back to you. But you can also, like I said, if you reach out through from any of the materials that I brought through that website and the volunteer page, I can make that connection as well. But yeah, through the Restore Our Shores website is usually the easiest way to get in touch with Kimberly. Okay. Yes, sir.
So I'm a pastor, and I know that for every good news, there's like this cranky pessimist. So what are you shared so many wonderful things. I'm so excited about this, but like what are the pessimists saying? And what are the cranky people saying?
That's a great question.
How can we
And that's the nicest that question has ever been before. Honestly, I mean, the vast majority, and I tell this to volunteers when I'm training volunteers to go out and do, to do work, information tables and things like that, is that the vast majority of people are nothing but excited. There are a couple of fairly specific groups where you might run into some questions and opposition, and it's usually based on misunderstandings. I am a lifelong fisherman. I belong to 2 different local fishing groups, and anglers have been the hardest group for me to connect with. I've never been scuba diving once in my life. We have a scuba diving club that I did one presentation for, and as a club they came in as founders for the aquarium like a week later. I have not been able to get a single fishing group to join on. And again, misconception. My own fly fishing group, I had a guy tell me, after a meeting, he's like, I'm really not happy about this project because, especially now that you guys are going to be renting jet skis. I went, huh? He said, yeah, you guys are going to be renting jet skis. I don't think so. Like, I know sometimes things change without me knowing, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to be renting jet skis. He was adamant. All right, here's my card. He didn't want to give me his contact info, so I gave him my card and said, please reach out to me. I will find out absolutely sure. I'll get confirmation from the design team. Never reached out, right? But hopefully somewhere that stuck. Or I had another angler who was frustrated because that shoreline there has some really nice mangroves. And if you go just south of the actual lot, there's some really nice mangroves. And he thought we were building it there. And now all those mangroves were going to get clear cut. Nope, we're about a few hundred yards north of that space. And then it was, well, but that shoreline has some really good snook fishing too. I want you guys to cut out all those mangroves. We pay our staff to plant mangroves in shorelines. We're not going to go and cut them all out, right? There's pepper mixed in with those mangroves, so we're going to tear that pepper out for sure. And then we're going to replace it with more mangroves. And we're going to add some docks and structure. And all that's going to do is going to make that fishing better. And we're not going to net it off so that nobody can come through. Again, we were trying to work with the people that work here. I think the biggest kind of looming question within the community is traffic and parking, because we know those are issues in the beach communities already. We know it's an issue in the zoo sometimes, even after we expanded our parking lot. I came in the day after Christmas to do a tour, and luckily came in early. And when I was leaving, there were people parking at 7-Eleven and walking to the zoo. This community just continues to grow. And so we are working with the port, we're working with the hotels, working with the local municipalities to try and ensure that we are part of the solution to the traffic issues out there on the beachside communities rather than part of the problem. I actually got to tour a facility for a automated electric mini shuttle service that is already in use in a couple of small communities throughout Florida. Was not as impressed with the first iteration as I expected it to be. The second generation sounds really cool, so we're hopeful for that. So we're meeting with the port and all the municipalities on kind of those issues and trying to ensure that there are as many opportunities for the tourists especially to get to the aquarium easily, from shuttles from the hotels, shuttles from the cruise industry, shuttles to and from restaurants, so that they don't have to drive their cars, so that then locals and members have those spaces to be able to get through their cars. So we know there's been plans for more parking already in the works out at the port. So we are kind of not necessarily driving those conversations, but we're on the sideline of them so that we can, again, kind of be part of that solution. But really, those are the biggest ones that I hear. You know, I get people that disagree with our focus of conservation, people that, you know, before we started working with clams, that, you know, were just adamant that oysters were a waste of time, they'll never survive in the Indian River Lagoon because we've never had oysters in the Indian River Lagoon. But then you go look at the shell piles and there's layers this thick of oyster shells. You know, well, we must have had them at some point. But then realize, okay, well, it hasn't been in their lifetime, right? We experience the world through our own experiences and the people that we know and the people that we trust. And so, I mean, really when it's come down to it, I haven't really had anyone who, after being able to really talk, wasn't at least like, you know, at the worst apathetic about the project. And kind of like, okay, yeah, fine. But the response has been overwhelmingly positive. And that's why I consider my job to be the best job in the entire world. Because my job is to get people excited about the zoo. And when I show up, 95, 98, 100% of people are already excited about the zoo, so that part's been done, which is pretty cool. Yes, ma'am?
What in the engineering process are you looking at to lessen the carbon footprint of this building, and the power that's going to be needed, the resources?
Great question.
Using wind, solar, what?
So, great question. So as far as the sustainability, because the goal of this facility is really to kind of 4 stories that will be within it. One's going to be ocean plastics, one's going to be sustainable seafood, local catch, things like that. But another one is going to be this sort of living lightly on the lagoon is what we're calling it, and kind of how wherever we live we can lessen our impact. And right now they're entering the design phase. So we've been in sort of the design development phase where we've kind of been going, okay, yeah, this building needs to be this many square feet, and this, you know, make sure that the engineering's going to sit there, and it's going to be here. No, it needs to be here. No, it needs to be here. Kind of doing that larger scale. And now we're at the point where they're really kind of diving into those more detailed aspects, including that. And so power, I don't know anything off the top of my head. I know with water, a couple of the newer things that we are starting to nail down. One is going to be recapture of water from our filtration systems. If you have a filtration system, you know, for a fish tank or something like that, you know, or a pool, you got to backwash it. Water flows through to trap stuff. Eventually, it's going to get clogged, and you got to force it back out by going the opposite way. And that can use a lot of water. And we have a system like that already in place at the zoo when we built our new rainforest habitat. The water for the fish, the filtration for the fish gets backwashed. That water goes into a holding tank, which has its own filter system, and then that water is clean enough to use as makeup water for the mammal systems that we have within that space as well. So things like that, cisterns for rainwater collection and recycling, using gray water for flushing toilets and things like that. And so they're working with, I know we've had a few meetings recently with Ferguson to kind of look at some of the impacts and some of the benefits that they can provide and help us working on grants to help lessen some of the costs, because as we know, those things all save costs in the long run, but added at the startup. So we are working with them to identify how can we add those things in as much as possible. And I don't know any more specifics currently, but would be happy to continue the conversation and connect you with the people that are on the design team for specific answers if you'd like. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Tying in with that, are you then going for a lead build certification?
Good question. That's actually been kind of an interesting point of contention because like half of our design team says it's not worth it because the certification process and all of those things are money that we could be putting into other things. And we can still build it to those kind of status and those sort of levels and not need the actual certification. And then the other half of the design team is like, but let's just do it. So it's been a conversation kind of back and forth. Regardless, I've been told that it will be at those levels. I don't know which lead certification level for sure we'll land at, but whether or not they actually go through the certification process is, I think, still to be determined, and depending on whose voice is loudest in the room at the end of the day. But I know that it is a pretty constant conversation. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just to put you on the spot,
Yeah.
with this group, is the plan developed to the point of what the landscaping will be?
Good question. Landscaping at this point is, this is ground cover, this is mid-height, this is tall stuff. That's about as far as landscaping design has gotten. Native plants will certainly be an important part of it. We've seen some really, really nice kind of additions of native plants have been to the zoo in the last few months. Our horticulture team has really started to add a lot more. We added a whole pollinator garden right by the bathrooms when you come into the entrance of the zoo. And one of those plants, and I keep asking our horticulture head the name of it because I can never remember. She tells me every time and I instantly forget it. A couple months ago when it was flowering, I counted 12 different species, all pollinated. I don't know what they all were, but I could tell they were different distinct. You know, we're talking multiple species of bumblebees, multiple burrowing bees, honeybees, hornets, wasps, butterflies, and it was just amazing. And we've seen huge blooms of, we've got a ton of cootie added, and so we've seen a ton of the Antala butterflies this year. We have hundreds of them hatching. So they're definitely going to be continuing that trend, but as of right now, as far as they've gotten with any of that design is literally just like, okay, yeah, this is low green, this is kind of medium green, this needs to be tall green. I can tell you for sure there won't be those like 60-year live oak trees that there were out there in some of the renderings. It's not going to grow too well on that sandy shifting soil out there, but the native plants are part of telling that story of living lightly on the lagoon. It's part of the conservation work we're starting to do more of. So it's certainly going to be part of the landscaping. We just don't have any of those details yet. So, now, I think we're going to continue moving. I will stick around afterwards. If anybody has any more questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Turn it back over to Carl here, and so you guys can finish up the rest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very impressive.
My pleasure.
I know.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you needed it still. All right.
Okay. Okey-doke. So if you want to talk to Zach or ask him any questions, so he'll be here for a bit. Appreciate you all coming out. Thank you. Oh, that's right. Plant raffle. Flip it 999. Okey-doke. Carol.